President Peterson, thank you for joining us. Mayor Ann, I see you're both logged on. We'd love to do a quick sound check. Jake, feel free if you want to do a quick sound check as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, sounding good, thank you.
Great.
Hi Josh, this is Lynn Peterson.
Excellent, thanks so much. Yep, sounds coming in good.
And Josh, good morning and good morning to everyone. How are we doing participation-wise?
We're doing well. We are still waiting on Mr. Donaghy, and I think Commissioner Hardesty has just joined us.
Great.
Good morning, Commissioner Hardesty.
Good morning. My apologies for being a minute late in a disaster policy meeting.
No worries, we appreciate your time. And Mayor Ann, if you could do a quick sound check, that would be great. And I see Mr. Donaghy has joined us. Welcome. If you want to do a quick sound check.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
So this is Eric Holmes sound checking for Mayor Ann.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. You are here.
Oh, this is what's Good morning.
Good morning. Can we see you?
They can hear you, Catherine.
So good morning, everybody. I may start with the logistics. I think we're ready. Does that seem yes? Right to go?
I believe
Good.
so. Yeah.
All right. Okay. And I may ask for a little bit of help with the layout on the screen when I get to a few of the explanations. But for now, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. This is Deb Noodleman, and I am part of the IBR team. Glad to be here with you today. We're really excited to have this meeting, and we're especially excited to be adding our American Sign Language interpretation to the meetings. It's really great. And so welcome, Amanda, welcome to the group. And we'll be explaining just a few of the logistics that go with that as we proceed. But if we could, first, I think Josh will just do really quickly a couple introductory slides. I usually call it the housekeeping and logistics, and then we'll be able to jump right in. So many of you, of course, we've all been in this virtual world together, but I'll just briefly go through these, make sure we're all on the same page. We are, of course, at an Interstate Bridge Replacement Executive Steering Group meeting, and glad to be with you today. It is a 2-hour meeting, and off we go. All right, thanks, Josh. Next slide. So we do have closed captions available in English and Spanish. The English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. You can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. And it's listed here at https://ibr.news/captions. Next slide. And just as a reminder how to access the closed captions, at the bottom middle of your screen, you should see a menu of options. If you can't see the menu, hover your mouse over the bottom middle of the screen, click on the CC window icon, and a separate window of captions will appear. So it's a closed caption window. Next slide. And then, as I said, we have American Sign Language interpretation. So in an effort to center equity, the IBR program has added American Sign Language interpretation for both Zoom and the YouTube live stream. For those watching on YouTube, when the presentation is displayed, so when we have these slides up on the screen, an ASL interpreter will be visible up at the top right of the screen. You'll be able to hear the presenters, but you won't be able to see the presenters. What we do want to tell you, if for some reason you'd like to be able to see and hear presenters and your ASL interpreter, you can hop over to the Zoom webinar. And there, it's just a functionality on these platforms, you'd be able to see both. Either way, we'd be really grateful that before people speak, if you could please state your name and affiliation to help attendees identify who is talking. Thanks so much. Next slide. So the usual webinar participation tips. First and foremost, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our executive steering group members, to our audience, to all the teams that are with us. Please join audio by either phone or computer, not both. We encourage panelists to turn on your video. Really appreciate being able to feel like we're in the room together. And reminder to keep your audio on mute when not speaking. If you happen to experience any technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 329-6744. Next slide. And the public input instructions. So as you know, folks are in listening mode during most of this meeting, and we always provide an opportunity for brief public input later in the meeting. We appreciate it, we value it. And to submit your input after the meeting, you can email your comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. You can also call in to leave a public comment at 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. Okay, next slide. So we're ready now. And if we could go to this next slide, thanks. So what we're gonna do is, Greg, if you'd kindly, we're gonna have some welcome and updates from first our program administrator, Greg Johnson, then executive steering group members, and then I'll move on the agenda pieces. So good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Deb. How are you? And good morning to the group. Thank you for being here. So just a quick update on where things are at. Probably the most newsworthy piece of information is that we have received written correspondence back from our federal partners, and we sent that out to everyone as part of your package. So it is in alignment with what they told us verbally, but we're going to talk about that a little later during the meeting. We also had an opportunity to sit with the co-chairs from the bi-state legislative team. So we had an excellent conversation with them and got the co-chairs up to speed on everything that's been occurring. We're looking to get a meeting set in the very near future. So we don't have a rock solid date locked in, but that is being worked on being worked on very hard on both sides to get a date, as Oregon is still in session, so we have to be respectful of that issue. But once again, today, what you're going to hear from our team is what are our next steps going forward, and how do we plan on tackling the tough issues, the decisions that are out in front of us. And what we're looking for from ESG is feedback and input. If you think we've missed something, please let us know. If you think there are things that we need not be doing, please put that on the table as well. But the purpose of this meeting is to take our next steps forward. We now have federal guidance in hand, so we are looking at how we are going to progress the program forward. So with that, we're also talking to your staff members on some technical work sessions to get at the changes that are desired by all our partners that we've heard from our community advisory group as well as equity advisory group. So those meetings are being worked on. We're also still working on the framework, and you're going to hear more as we talk about the federal guidance, how the equity and climate framework will fit into the NEPA process. So with that as a quick overview, Deb, I will flip it back to you for further comments.
Great, thank you so much, appreciate it. So let's just head once around the virtual table so folks have a chance for introductions and any updates you would like to share. If I could start with Director Strickler.
Thanks, Deb. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me again. Yes. Wonderful. So my update and good morning is really brief. I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody for dedicating the time. There's been a lot of work that's led to this point, and I know that's not just this group, but also at the staff level. And quite frankly, our citizen volunteers that are spending a lot of time helping us guide this process as well. So thank you to Mr. Johnson for spearheading all of the effort and for all of your collective efforts coming to the table. Clearly, there is a sense of we do need to move forward with the project, get things going and those kinds of things. So I, again, appreciate everybody's attention, and as always, look forward to the discussion. So good morning, everybody. Great to see you. Look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you so much. And onward next to Secretary Millar.
Good morning, everyone. Roger Millar, Washington State DOT. The governor signed our budget into law earlier this week, which is a good thing. It is a current law budget. The governor and the legislature are still working on new revenue, including plans for the revenue for the design and construction of this particular project, whatever it turns out to be. So great progress in the environmental arena, some progress in the transportation arena, and looking forward to continued discussion this summer about new revenue. Good to see everybody and looking forward to a great meeting.
Great, thanks so much. If I could go next to the city. So City of Portland, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, City of Portland, PBOT Commissioner.
Okay, great to have you with us. Thank you. And next, City of Vancouver.
Good morning. Eric Holmes, City Manager for the City of Vancouver, obviously not Mayor Ann, but sitting in as the face on the screen. She'll be joining us in just a few minutes, and I know she's looking forward to engaging in the conversation with our partners over the next couple hours, and looking forward to that.
Great, thank you, Eric. So next on, if I could go to RTC next, and then Metro.
Hi, it's Scott Hughes, Chair of the RTC. Nothing to report, but looking forward to the meeting today and hearing what they have to say.
Okay, Metro. President Peterson may have had to step away. Oh, there we go.
Hi guys, apologies. Lynn Peterson, Metro Council President.
Glad to have you with us. Thanks so much. Next up, TriMet, then CTRAN. Steve. We do know there's a few people that have some technical difficulties today. So Josh, remind me, I'll keep heading around the table. How about Sean, CTRAN? Go ahead.
Yeah, Sean Donahue with CTRAN. Good morning. We'll just say that based on the information that was in the extensive recap by Administrator Johnson, that we're at an extremely important place in the project now that we've received some guidance from the feds, and we need to make sure that we review that thoroughly as a group to understand what our next steps are. I'm looking forward to having that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Hi, Steve, go ahead.
Good morning, I'm Steve Witter from TriMet. I'm the Executive Director of Engineering Construction. I'm sitting here in an interim role representing the General Manager's Office at TriMet. I think, I'd just like to echo what my partner Sean mentioned. We are glad to finally have some guidance that we can react to, and I look forward to how we all work collectively in moving forward given that guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the ports, if I could, Port of Vancouver.
Good morning, everyone. Juliana Marler, CEO with the Port of Vancouver, and I also look forward to the conversation and appreciate the information that we recently received, and look forward to discussing how we use that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Port of Portland.
Kristen Leonard with the Port of Portland, and want to echo a lot of comments of appreciation to the Equity Advisory Group and Community Advisory Group, and look forward to some of those conversations about hearing more on the recommendations today on the agenda. And also want to echo some comments about just figuring out how to really enhance this connection between our efforts and our critical federal partners moving forward, and make sure that we are all moving forward in alignment and with a common goal. So anyway, thank you for all of the hard work getting us to where we are today, and I look forward to more moving forward.
Great, thank you and welcome. And then to our co-chairs, to our CAG, which is the Community Advisory Group co-chairs. So Lynn Valenter and then Ed Washington.
Good morning. As stated, Lynn Valenter from the Washington side of the river, and I will have comments later, but nothing for now. Thank you.
Great. Ed?
Yeah, Ed Washington, co-chair from Oregon. Good to see you all. I have no comments.
Glad to have you with us. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and welcome again to our audience. So we'll go ahead with just a few more slides here, and then we can jump right in. Thank you so much, Josh. So the agenda, a packed agenda, and again, plenty to do in our 2-hour window. So as soon as I finish in this introductory section, we'll move on to a really exciting section for information and discussion with Executive Steering Group about framing equity. So lots of great information to share, and then hoping for some good question answer group discussion through that section. Following that, we'll be doing an update on the federal guidance and the IBR approach moving forward, piece that Administrator Johnson's introduced, and again, lots of information to share. We'll then take the discussion for that piece as well as your input and feedback about both the IBR approach moving forward, about any feedback you'd like to share that the program can take with to the Bi-State Legislative Committee, and as importantly, where things are working and not working for all of you and how to help it come together as we all are diligently working to move the program forward. We then have time for brief public input, opportunity for public input, followed by confirming upcoming meeting topics, next steps and summary, and we'll adjourn no later than noon. Okay, so that's our agenda for today. Next slide, please. Quick high-level ground rules. Remembering to honor the agenda, listening to understand and ask questions to clarify, focus on the substance and content. We call that soft on the people and their style, hard on the problems. Seeking common ground and alignment where possible, and providing balance of speaking time to make sure everybody's wisdom and expertise is shared around the table. Next slide. So just a couple quick things before we hop in. I do always want to remind people that these meetings are being recorded, that if you miss a portion or if you know of people that couldn't attend today, they are always posted to the website. And in addition, all the materials that you're seeing today up on the screen, the slides and any of the other documents will be posted after the meeting, along with any other public comment that we receive. So I think we're ready to move on. And so we're into our framing equity topic, and I think Administrator Johnson, you'll introduce our speakers.
Yes, so thanks, Deb. So we have been touting that the fact that we are centering equity as a part of the IBR program. So we, in that spirit, we want to make sure that folks understand what things we are doing as far as creating an equity framework. We rolled out the definition that the EAG came to last meeting for you. So this is going to be a more in-depth dive and talk about, you'll hear from John L. Bell as well as Jake to talk about what we are doing and give you an update on where we're at with framing equity in the program. So with that, I'll turn it over to John L.
Great, thank you, Administrator Johnson, and good morning, committee. Thank you all for the opportunity to really roll up our sleeves and kind of expressing to you a little bit as to how we're thinking about equity. So next slide, please. We always start off with, it's really important for us to understand what equity is at its purest form. And ultimately, it comes down to when one's identity cannot predict the outcome, absence of inequities and injustices in social sectors that are required for all to thrive. And that is also both an outcome and a process. And so when we talk about equity, we really are striving to ensure that one's identity does not determine the future course of their outcome. Next slide, please. As Administrator Johnson indicated, it was really important for the program, building upon that knowledge, to identify what equity was for the IBR program. We, of course, worked with our equity advisory group, which is just a great cross-section of individuals, both who have content expertise in diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as members who come to this work with lived experience. And what we learn in identifying that process is that it was important, again, to have two sort of elements of our definition: process equity and outcome equity. And I'll just read it here. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program defines equity in terms of both process and outcomes. Process equity means that the program prioritizes access, influence, and decision-making power for marginalized and underserved communities throughout the program, and establishing objectives, design, implementation, and evaluation of success. Outcome equity is a result of successful process equity and is demonstrated by tangible transportation and economic benefits for marginalized and underserved communities. Next slide. And so then the question is, how do we identify marginalized communities? Now, what I'll state about our definition, oftentimes in infrastructure efforts, there are kind of two elements of kind of how a population is considered communities of concern. There's Title VI population, which is protected under, is often considered protected class populations, minority populations, that's protected under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And then there are EJ populations, which typically focuses on low-income populations. And so what we have done is to go in addition to protected class and EJ populations, and this is how the committee and the program has defined marginalized and underserved communities, are defined as those who experience and or have experienced discrimination and exclusion based on identity, such as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, communities with limited English proficiency, persons with lower incomes, houseless individuals and families, immigrant and refugees, young people, older adults. Together, process equity and outcome equity contribute to addressing the impacts of and removing longstanding injustices experienced by these communities. Next slide. And so to talk a little bit about our equity approach, the foundation of our equity approach revolves around our equity advisory group. And as indicated, this is a cross-section of representatives from CBOs, community members from both states. Really the purpose of the EAG is to provide input and recommendations to the program on ways to ensure equitable processes and create equitable outcomes. We also are developing, as we've come before this body, the equity framework, which will be a tool, an equity lens to help guide the program towards these outcomes that we indicate wanting to have. And then, of course, part and parcel to our equity strategy is to have targeted outreach opportunities. We know for so many communities of concern, all of the populations that we just described, there is a trust deficit with government, and it's important for us to meet our communities where they are if we truly want to integrate their perspectives into our decision-making. So having targeted outreach approaches, such as ensuring that we're paying via gift cards for folks' time. We're not expecting folks to show up to our committees for free. Making sure that our community-based organizations have the necessary capacity to engage in this process in meaningful ways are all of the things that we're implementing. Next slide, please. But where the rubber meets the road oftentimes, and this is what we'll continue to talk about, is how do you really operationalize equity? And I've been doing equity work for quite some time. In an infrastructure effort, we'll be exploring multiple ways, but some of the ways that will ensure that the framework is operationalized, our commitments are operationalized, will be, for example, in contract specifications. And in the contract specifications, we can identify what our workforce requirements are, what our workforce aspirations are. For example, BIPOC representation, we want to see in our project. Ensuring that we have targets to ensure we reach persons with disabilities that we want to be employed on our project. Program investment in pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs. It is so critically important that we invest years, months prior to any ground being broken on construction, if our goal is really to help folks go from poverty to prosperity, and that we're thinking from a systems approach. That we have solid DBE participation goals. That DBE goal requirement is not the ceiling. Oftentimes in projects, the DBE goal is seen as the ceiling, but our notion is that whatever our eventual goal will be, it will be seen as the floor, not the ceiling. And of course, the need to debundle packages. We know this to be true, that if you want a DBE to be successful in an effort, you gotta bundle the package in a way that is the right size, such that the firms can accomplish that package and grow capacity. And then to have targeted investments in businesses reflective of the program's equity definition is going to be really important. For us also to explore some of the other community benefits, and we've been having conversations around the EAG. What's the program's responsibility to explore potential ancillary property that might result in the construction? What's the conversation around affordable housing with that ancillary property? What's the conversation around green space in that conversation? And that ultimately that we're integrating the rich cultural history into project design. This corridor has so much history. Many folks don't realize the history it has, but it has such a rich history. Next slide. Again, you'll recall our elements of the equity framework essentially include four sort of sections. One piece of the equity framework is program definition. And this really comes down to what does equity mean in the context of IBR. There are the equity objectives. What do we want to actually achieve? And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. It's our measure of success, which is what do we want to measure and how will we measure it? We can all have all of the flowery language we want around equity, but if we're not measuring it, if we're not operationalizing it, it's nothing more than empty rhetoric. And so we need to hold ourselves accountable, make sure we're building it into our performance measures such that we're achieving the results that we all indicate is important in this project. And that goes into putting into action the community engagement, the design, the construction, the specifications. That's where, again, the rubber meets the road. Next slide, please. You'll recall our equity objectives. This originally started within the context of purpose and need. And we talked to the equity advisory group about sort of what objectives did we really want relative to equity. Think about the overarching kind of categories, one of which is mobility and accessibility, physical design, community benefits, economic opportunity, decision-making process, and avoiding further harm, sort of the mitigations. And so those are our overarching categories that we will be building our performance measures and screening criteria under each of those categories. Next slide, please. So what that will look like in practice is, again, the equity objectives. These are really the big picture objectives, answering the question, what do we want to achieve? Then that feeds into the indicators. How will we know in 2, 5, 10 years if we are closer to the desired result? The strategies, how will we actually achieve one or more indicators? Then the activities, what specific actions must be taken by whom and by when to achieve the above strategy? Then the measuring of success, understanding the baseline data. What we did at our last EAG meeting is just to ask, what data exists in our collective community? What data should we be collecting and cataloging to ensure we really have a grasp of the baseline of where our communities are starting, and such that we set targets with timelines and we track. One of the things that we'll be doing as part of this work is to create a dashboard to really determine whether or not, once we've identified our indicators, whether or not we're actually making progress towards that, such that not only the public, but the whole program has a level of transparency around what our equity commitments are. Next slide, please. So now we'll share a few slides just in terms of the demographic snapshot. I'll just note that the program area is very diverse, and the diversity has changed and evolved since 2010. That we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. 25% of the program area is people of color, people with disabilities, 20% higher than the region. Low-income households, 32% higher than the region. People born outside the U.S., 7%. Households with no vehicles, 15%. Older adults, as defined as 65 and older, 20%. Young people, 25 and under, 21%. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides here that will show this in sort of a illustrated form. Next slide, please. So we start with 2010. Just a note, the darker the color denotes the percentage of population of persons with color. And then, of course, the converse denotes the less concentration. So we start off in 2010. You'll see the dotted line. That's the general program area. Next slide. 2019. So you see the difference there. We've become significantly more diverse in terms of racial and cultural diversity. Next slide. A similar slide here, this time looking at low-income households. Darker the color, again, denotes concentration, and this is based on 200% poverty level. Next slide. 2019. And what's interesting about that slide, and we don't know this to be the case, but my own suspicion is you'll notice how it got lighter in color. I think that has a lot to do with the cost of housing and the inaffordability, and frankly, some gentrification that has occurred where folks, again, are being pushed further out. Next slide. We're looking at older adults now, 2019. Next slide. And then households without a vehicle. Jake, I'm going to turn over to you to talk about this slide and the next few ones.
Great. Thanks, John L. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time, for being here. So yeah, as part of what we are looking into here as we examine transportation equity, is certainly those households that are going to, and those people that are going to rely more heavily on transit and other modes besides driving. And that's going to play into some of the metrics that we develop. But one thing that we found, and John L. mentioned this earlier, was that in the program area, we have a pretty high concentration of households without a vehicle. So you can see in downtown Vancouver, there's a pretty high concentration where over a third of households do not have a vehicle. And then the surrounding area, higher than average compared to the region, where overall 15% of households do not have a vehicle, and in the region as a whole, that's 9%. So you do have a lot of carless households. Next slide. We also showed some job concentrations to the EAG at our last meeting. That was something that they had been asking for. So we looked into this to see in relation to the program area, where those job concentrations are, where people are needing to get, and how the program can help make accessing those jobs better. So we have pretty high concentrations in places you would expect. On the north shore of the Columbia River in Oregon, a lot of industrial land. You have the ports, you have the airport, and a variety of different employers. On the Washington side, you have some concentrations also near the Port of Vancouver, Pearson Airfield, Clark College, and then up Fourth Plain Boulevard there where the CTRAN Vine runs. And I see that Director Millar has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that as we all look at these maps, we recognize that we're looking at census tracts by geographic area, and we're not necessarily looking at the number of jobs and the gross number of jobs or the gross population. Keeping all the census tracts the same and looking at percentages is kind of like looking at voting patterns and having Petroleum County, Montana, population 400, given the same weight as King County, Washington, or Multnomah County, Oregon. So this is good data, but we need to understand the limitations of it and just be cognizant that when you see a census tract that includes Portland International Airport, population characteristics are maybe different from a census tract that is in an area that's more residential in nature. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Great point. In this case, we do have numbers of jobs, but you're very right that bigger areas are going to have more jobs generally than the smaller ones. But yes, thank you for that. Next slide. So then looking at the region as a whole, where those concentrations of jobs are in relation to the program area, we wanted to demonstrate, where are people getting, not just in the immediate vicinity of the program area, but throughout the region. And I'm sure a lot of you see those job concentrations in places you would expect along Highway 217 and 26 in Washington County, again, north shore of the Columbia River in Oregon, and throughout Clark County. Next slide. So when we presented this to the EAG on Monday, we heard back a few things. One is that we need to understand more. There's a desire to get even deeper. So more information about transportation modes people are using and commute times, the cross relationship between those two. Wanted to see more demographic overlays, not just individual communities, but combined, BIPOC and income, carless households and older adults, things like that. So we'll be putting that together. And then really the part of the purpose of that data and how we can use it to examine anti-displacement strategies and assess the risk of displacement related to program improvements and what can be done as informed by that data. Next slide. As far as our work plan, we showed you this at the last meeting and just wanted to give you an update. So as John L. went through, we have adopted an equity definition. We've refined our equity objectives. And now we are very heavily into developing the performance measures. That baseline data was a foundation for that, as well as screening criteria, which you have heard a lot about and will continue to hear a lot more about. And then the EAG, we will be providing some specific design recommendations based on that definition and objectives once those are developed.
Great. And with that, we'd love to take any questions or comments you have. Thank you for your continued support of the equity efforts on this program.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Questions, feedback, observations? Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the equity group is really doing a great job, and I appreciate all their work they're doing. Because, Vancouver and where the bridge is going to land, that's of critical importance to our First Nations that were here. They're going to be landing on where they were at. One of the slides there, you were talking about percent of targets. I would imagine that's on the construction work, Janelle, if that's what you're talking about. My question is, are we talking about companies owned by minorities, or are we talking about employee base? There's kind of two different things there. And you could have a minority company in New York working out here, but to me, it's more important that I would think we want, those numbers to be employees almost more than companies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to have an effective equity strategy is a requirement of both. There are so many things you can do to influence equity decision making just based on the types of questions you ask in the selection panel. As you know, what kind of information you require, contractors to present. For example, asking contractors to present what's the makeup of their employee base, and so elements like that. I think are going to be critical. So I think there will be ongoing discussion, but I would anticipate both.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for that presentation. You know, there's a word that's in that document that I hear a lot, and it's marginalized communities. And I'm always struggled with that word because the communities didn't get marginalized by themselves. It's kind of like in the education field where we talk about the achievement gap as if it's the child's failure as compared to the failure of the education system to really provide the necessary resources for their education. And so I just wanted to share that. That just every time I hear that term, I'm uncomfortable. It makes me a bit uncomfortable. But one question that I wanted to add as far as goals are concerned, I know that at the national level, the Transportation Administration is really talking about undoing harm that has been created by former transportation policy. And I would love to see a measurement, and I don't have the words, but I would love to see a measurement that actually asked if this, whatever this is moving us towards mitigating previous harm done by transportation policy. We know First Nations communities were moved. We know African Americans get moved for every freeway project. We know that at the national level, they're even pushing back on some transportation projects because they are exacerbating the previous harm that's been done. So I'm really curious, what kind of measurement could we develop that would actually address the institutional racial inequitable outcomes that are historically built into our transportation projects?
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. That's an excellent question, one that we've been wrestling with and unpacking. It's the notion of restorative justice to some degree. And we follow the theme, the notion that, you know, so much in transportation context and it is focused on mitigating disproportionate impact on communities of concern. And I personally just reject that framing because I think it's the notion of further harm. Instead, I think there's a huge opportunity in mega projects like this to disproportionately benefit those who have historically been harmed, right? How do we disproportionately increase resources? And I think the way in which you measure that is looking at proportionality in terms of investments relative to, for example, DBE firms, making sure that we are having significant and intentional investments in building capacities of our DBE firms. I think another area is around workforce, making sure that the population working on our project is not only reflective of the population of the program, but is over reflective of the program area. And that's going to require some intentional work in terms of working with our community-based organizations, working with targeted schools, and so on. So those are some ways I think we can start to integrate some of those performance measures. I think the other thing that's going to be critical, Commissioner, is how we are tracking the workforce across projects. IBR is reflective of one project, but as you know, we have other projects in the region. And it's so critically important that we are tracking apprentice and pre-apprentice that might enter on one program and creating pathways such that they can graduate into journey level, perhaps on our program. That's really, and why that's important, as you know, Commissioner, is so many of our DBE firms start off first as craftspeople. And if we really want to grow the level of generational wealth, we really have to start growing small businesses in these communities.
John, if I can add,
please,
that we also are looking at best practices at organizations who have done this well. We're talking to Sound Transit, who has a a vast background. We're talking to TriMet and looking at some of their programs that have been successful in looking at this issue of justice in communities. So we also have some members on our team who have done this across the country. So we're looking for best practices that we can implement here that will address those concerns that you mentioned, Commissioner.
Thank you. I do think though we need a benchmark that actually clearly identifies the restorative justice component. I've been around long enough to know that if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't become part of the lexicon of how we talk about this project, it won't exist. And so I'm a strong fan of let's write it down and really think about what that looks like, because I think that's the innovation. I think that's the opportunity to really walk our talk and stop using words like equity and diversity as stopgaps, when in fact what we're looking for are different kind of outcomes on these kind of projects. And I will say any project of this size that does not move people from pre-apprenticeship to journeyman, I will see as a total failure.
Appreciate those comments, Commissioner, and I look forward to working with you to refine our effort here.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had next up, it's Sean, Steve, and then Lynn.
Yeah, I would just, just make a general comment that our Deputy CEO sits on the Equity Committee, speaks volumes of the work that John L. and the team are doing. So I just want to make sure that we recognize that group for that. And I also share a lot of the comments that Commissioner Hardesty made in regards to the equity piece and really more on the restorative part and the benchmarking of how we sort of gauge the success of that. And I think those are important conversations given the guidance we were given by our federal partners. And depending on which path we choose as a group later on down the road, it's going to be significantly important for us to decide where equity and climate sort of fall into these critical pathways below purpose and need, if that's indeed the path that we take. So I appreciate the comments that were made before me, and definitely appreciate the work that John L. is doing. I know that's a good group, and I just want to make sure they're recognized. I know there's a lot of conversation going on there, and the reports that I get back from our team are always positive about the good work being done. So I just want to make sure we recognize that.
Appreciate those comments, John. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Steve Witter, TriMet.
Great, thank you, Deb. I mean, echo obviously the great comments ahead of me, but what I wanted to say just on the workforce piece, that is so critical. And if you follow the great history that TriMet's had, you're going to be too late. You're going to be too late. And I'm going to tee this up for President Peterson. I don't want to steal her thunder, but she has spent a lot of time with the project partners down here on a construction career pathways program. And so maybe what I'll do is just leave that for her to hit the ball now.
Thank you, Steve. That's exactly what I wanted to just get into the space is I think so much work has gone on within the region with all of our partners based off the good work that that has happened at TriMet and taking off from there with the ports work as well of basically working to make sure that we are hitting those marks that Commissioner Hardesty just mentioned, which is to get the continuum of growth to women and people of color within the construction industry and make sure that those apprenticeship hours are moving them on to journeyman level. And I think the conversation that you've started is really, really good work. And thank you. I think what we need to do is go to the next level now and bring everybody into the room from the labor through to the contractors and those that are really thinking about how do we get this this continuum going, right? And then I will just add that the continuum is all the way to getting folks in the construction arena of going from subs to primes. And so it's from the workforce development all the way through the contractors development. And so we need both of those happening at the same time. And I don't want to lose the continuum on the contractor side too, because our goal is to get them to prime status, not just to get them a percentage of the work, right? They need the percentage of the work to be able to get to the prime status. So I think if we can do both, I think that we'll be hitting a home run. So thank you.
Thank you, President Peterson. Could not agree 100% more. That's exactly right. It's about both building the number of firms, because that feeds into the capacity challenges, right? If we're going to the same firms for different projects, that actually is counter to building the generational wealth and the depth that we need in our region. But it's also, as you indicate, investing in the subcontractors such that they can graduate to become prime contractors. And we have some good examples here regionally, but we need more. And so certainly look forward to working with you to continue that work.
I'm just going to jump in because this is critical, right? If we are not expanding the pool, I mean, nothing makes me crazier than the fact that we go to the state certified list as if it's a magical list that tells us everything we need to know. And all of us know that that state list is only 20% of people who have a business license and who are doing this work all over our region. And I get so sick of hearing there's no one available because we went to the 20% list looking for people to do work, that will not be acceptable in a project of this size. And so we all have to think outside of the box. And let me just say, I am pro-union 100,000%. But having said that, I'm also pro-eating and people being able to pay to keep a roof over their head and being able to feed their family. So we have to do it all. And maybe we get to increase all kind of opportunities for folks who have never had an opportunity inside these kind of events, right? And I'm sick of us going to that same 20% and then pretending we can't find anybody else. And unfortunately, federal contracts actually gives us that laziness because we just say, oh, we just have to go to an ESB list and everything's lovely, right? That's not going to be acceptable.
Appreciate that, Commissioner Hardesty. I agree. We are going to have to level up, I think, across the region to find additional firms and help to create firms who might be on the verge and just need additional support, because we cannot just focus and depend on existing folks on our list. And that's going to require some work. So I agree.
Great conversation. And Secretary Millar, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with what everyone is saying. I want to caution that as an agency, we've been on this mission at least since I've been secretary, and President Peterson was on this mission before my time, and we are attacking this programmatically. We are not creating a different program for every project we do around our state. So what we want to make sure we do is we address the issues of racial justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. We acknowledge that our past practices have created disparate impacts and that those impacts linger today. And we commit to do this work. But we're doing this work all throughout our state, and I'm sure Oregon is doing the same thing, and I'm sure that our transit partners, our port partners and all, we need to build on those programs and augment those programs rather than reinventing those programs. And where we can share here in this group our best practices to make each of our programs better, that so much the better. But we just need to recognize that while we are doing this work, that we're doing this work in a context that, as big as this project is, our programs are larger still. And I want to make sure that we all recognize that it needs to be tackled in that context and not as a one-off.
I just want to pause Really appreciate the conversation. Anybody else? Well, thank you. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for both the presentation, for the great work, for being with us today. And yes, definitely.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Thank you. So we're ready to move on to the next section. I do want to say, as we transition, there's a little bit of a piece in our technology that when we have the ASL interpretation, you may be noticing, executive steering group members, that sometimes your screen toggles back and forth when the slides come back up. And I just want to tell you, there's a view button in the upper right-hand corner. It's called there's a speaker view and a gallery view. So if for some reason you prefer not to be in speaker view, you can go hover over that upper right-hand corner, click back on gallery view, and you'll see this happen when the slides come up, and it lets you see the faces while you're looking at the document. So we're ready to go on now. And so Josh, if you want to go ahead and put up the slides, and Administrator Johnson, if you want to go ahead, and we're kicking off the next section. Thank you so much. Greg, you're on mute. Thanks.
Thank you, Deb. So as we spoke earlier, we have a nice milestone, which is guidance from our federal partners. So we want to do a debrief on what we have heard from our federal partners. We don't believe that the written guidance has strayed tremendously far from the verbal guidance that they gave us, but there's some assurances that equity and climate are important to our federal partners, both FTA and FHWA, and that it will be a part of the NEPA process. So we talked to you last time about the 4 pathways. Those 4 pathways still exist for us, and you're going to see some more on that. The written response from our federal partners was in response to what we sent to them back in March, which was a language that inserted equity and climate into purpose and need and vision and values. So that's the primary issue that the letter addresses. And once again, we're going to have the team walk you through what some of that, what those statements mean and what that means for the team as we plot our path forward. So once again, some of the key takeaways: they strongly support consideration of climate change and equity in transportation projects. Secondly, that changes to purpose and need section are particularly sensitive since it is critical to determine a range of alternatives that must be considered. And the proposed modifications of language to purpose and need would impact the FEIS substantially enough to require a new EIS and NEPA process. So those are our key takeaways. So I'm going to ask Chris Reagan to walk us through some of the finer details.
Thank you, Administrator Johnson. My name is Chris Reagan. I'm the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program Environmental Manager. Great today. As Greg said, it's a good milestone for us. We did get written words that we believe are consistent with what we've heard. And it's important to understand, again, some more of those key points. Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration believe there are many opportunities to address climate and equity with meaningful mitigation measures and actions. We're actively working on that. You just heard from our Principal Equity Officer, Janelle Bell, about that. We strongly encourage the IBR team to consider ways to include climate and equity in the NEPA process, and we're talking through what that's going to look like. Next slide, please. Also heard that any efforts to identify new alternatives would likely lead to similar conclusions. So this is part of our assessment of what we're looking at here. If the key program takeaways that we have: any efforts to identify new alternatives would likely lead to similar conclusions, since the previously identified transportation problems continue to exist today. We spent about 5 months. Important to recognize, we've been doing a reevaluation. We're continuing the reevaluation. Part of the reevaluation was looking at what are the needs out there. We spent the last 5 months, and at the end of 5 months, we identified that climate and equity were very important, but that the other 6 needs were still alive and important for us to focus on today. Also, that reopening the work would extend the program schedule. It would delay implementation of a solution to address the transportation problems in the IBR corridor, and would add significant expense to complete work previously completed, with a strong likelihood that similar solutions would be identified. Again, we have the same 6 needs identified within this corridor. The program and our federal partners are aligned to strongly support including equity and climate in both the environmental process as well as with the outcomes. So next slide, please. You've heard from our program of the ways that we intend to do that. The current IBR approach is committed to embedding equity and climate in actionable and measurable ways through the equity and climate frameworks that consider throughout design and construction. We are going to be looking at screening criteria to evaluate design, specific performance measures, design and construction specifications. We'll be working with letters of agreement, so things are written down and you can see those. And we'll be talking about program commitments to community enhancements and mitigations. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, we've been doing a reevaluation. We continue to work on a reevaluation, and it's important to understand what a reevaluation is. We are working right now to define the elements of the IBR program, our approach to address changes that have occurred. So the elements of that IBR approach, together with the response from federal highways on the environmental impacts of that approach, is considered a NEPA reevaluation. The information that we're going to provide to Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration in the reevaluation submittal is going to look at what has changed and how do we propose solutions to address those changes within the program area. Federal Highways, that work, along with understanding the impacts of those changes, is going to be the reevaluation. Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration's response to that reevaluation, that is what's going to determine our path forward. We don't determine the path. Our federal leads determine the path based upon the information that we provide to them. So next slide, please. So we've talked about the 4 pathways. We have a compilation of design options to address the changes within the program area that feeds in, along with our environmental analysis of impacts associated with those design options. Our federal partners want us to ensure that we justify why does the change in physical condition, there's a new building that's in a specific location where we are planning to develop. What are the changes in policies and regulations? New listing of endangered species, the elevation of climate and equity policies in the region and in the states. What is the context and passage of time? So new demographic data. What is the context that requires a new design option? We'll provide that justification. We'll describe the design option study, whether or not the design options that we talk about were studied in the previous planning efforts in the draft and final environmental impact statement. If they were alternatives that were eliminated prior to the draft environmental impact statement. We'll discuss design options within whether or not the design option was within the previous NEPA footprint. If it extends beyond the NEPA footprint, it's likely that it will bring new environmental impacts. And we'll also talk specifically about what those new adverse impacts might be. When we know what has changed and what we're doing about it, what the impacts of how we plan to proceed are, we provide that to our federal partners, and the federal partners do everything below that yellow box. If the design options collectively have no new significant adverse impacts, we're done. There's no more work. The reevaluation is complete, it's documented, and we're done. If the revisions that we're talking about, or if we reach down deeply and change the foundational portions of the work that was done in our previous planning efforts, then we're really talking about the fourth path. So the documentation that we had from our federal partners identified that if we fundamentally change what was initially scoped, we at least have to revise the EIS. And that requires great detail and looking at how that might change the scoped alternatives. And it quite likely could lead us to a new EIS or a new project under NEPA. We would have to stop, we would rescope, and we would try to define what are the transportation needs and how do we go forward from there. If we work to understand what the changes are and what we're doing about them, and we are within the range of alternatives, then we are within the scope of a supplemental environmental impact statement, and that's paths 2 and 3. We're focused right now to define what those changes are and what to do about that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ray, I think, to describe that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, good morning. I'm Ray Mabey, Assistant Program Administrator. Like Chris said, I'll be providing a little more detail on the approach moving forward, and then Frank will follow up with discussion around screening criteria and some examples. We'll be advancing an alternative that's a combination of design options through the process Chris just mentioned. We are and will continue to work with our partners and the public to develop design options to address physical and conceptual changes. Some design options may have impacts on others, so we'll have to consider them individually as well as collectively. And by working with our partners and with the community input, we'll identify the combination of design options to be screened, selected, and ultimately included in the alternative moving through the process. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level schedule of the approach moving forward. We'll be developing design options and screening criteria commensurately. Looking to wrap that up mid-fall. We'll begin screening design options before the work's completed, so we're using time wisely. And then work to update the design options to go in the alternative and bring that to the ESG mid-spring for input and recommendations. Throughout this process, we'll be developing the commitments that Chris mentioned, continue to collect data and do analysis and modeling. We expect this will be an iterative process. And of course, throughout the program, we'll have a robust community engagement. So next, I'll turn it over to Frank to discuss the screening criteria and some of the examples of changes that we're working on.
Thank you, Ray. Frank Green, the other assistant program administrator, and kind of pulling together a little bit of what you heard from John L's presentation. I think the good discussion that happened as we went around the table talking about performance measures and screening criteria. As you saw laid out on the timeline before, this is an important piece of work that we're beginning now, working with our staff level group, with our partners, working with our advisory groups, working with the community through a series of listening sessions and public meetings that we'll have, but really trying to identify exactly how do we define success as far as measurement goes for the design options that we're looking at. What are the screening criteria that if there are some areas where we have multiple design options that we're looking at, how do we determine between different design options which option should move forward? And so an example of a performance measure could be percentage of construction materials that are from local sources or something along those lines. And along the same lines, an example of screening criteria could be how accessible are the transportation options and solutions that we're providing? Access to stations or access to transit, access to active transportation facilities and paths. Those are going to be important criteria and measurements that we'll be developing concurrently with trying to brainstorm and lay out some of the design options. Next slide, please. But before we really dive into the design options, building upon what Chris had started to say, one of the key questions that we're really working with, once again, our partners and the community and our advisory groups, is looking to see what has changed since previous planning had occurred. What is shown on this slide is a list of contextual changes. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is a list from the initial engagement that we've had with some of our partners through the staff level group. But touching upon that, there's regional, state, and local policies that are different for equity and climate change than they were with previous planning discussions. We walked through the demographics and how they've changed in the time since the previous planning had occurred. But there's a lot of contextual changes that we will identify design options to address to see if we need to change, whether they're environmental regulations or some of the other contextual I mentioned. Next slide, please. But it's also important to recognize there are actually physical changes that have occurred as well. And so what this graphic shows is kind of an overview aerial map of the program area with Portland on the left side of the screen and Vancouver on the right side of the screen and the river in the middle. And the areas that are highlighted yellow are just a few of the physical changes that we know we've identified have occurred since the previous planning effort. So for instance, we know that there's currently a redevelopment plan and study going on at the Expo Center, which currently is where transit's terminus for TriMet's Max is. On the island, we know there's been a lot of development going on, and just one that, for example, that we knew we had identified is previous planning. The Cracker Barrel is new, for instance, a restaurant on the island. And so how does the program look at design options to address that there's new developments like that? Also, you see West Hayden Island highlighted. Working closely with our partners, we've heard previously there had been some plans by the Port of Portland to do some expansion on West Hayden Island and some work there. And we've heard that maybe those plans have changed a little bit. On the Washington side, we know there's been a lot of work that's gone on with the waterfront. It has changed significantly in the last since the last planning efforts. But there's other development in downtown Vancouver as well. That could be office buildings, apartment complexes, and also C-Trans Vine is operating now. So these changes are this list is ever growing. This graphic is not a all-inclusive list of all the changes. We just wanted to be able to provide a few examples of what we've already heard, because if you can go to the next slide, please. That directly relates to the brainstorming and the identification of design options that we will look at in conjunction with our partners and the advisory groups and the public, to try to look at what are some different solutions or potential designs that can try to avoid, minimize, or if not be able to avoid or minimize, mitigate, for some of these changes that have occurred. And how do we incorporate those changes into the final solution to maximize the benefit of what this transportation program can provide? Once again, this is not an exhaustive list. We wanted to try to capture the kinds of design options that we will be looking at. And so, just working from kind of left to right on the page, you see there's a lot of highway options that I think we need to look at as a partnership with the program partners in the community, such as how does the freeway access Hayden Island? We've heard that there's a desire to see if there's a way to minimize the footprint and the impacts on Hayden Island, and so is that trying to combine interchanges where possible, or just looking to maybe different concepts for how an interchange connection would happen. In Oregon, one of the key things that we've been talking about looking into is the bridge that carries I-5 over the North Portland Harbor. In previous planning efforts, the discussion revolved around seismically retrofitting that bridge. But knowing, time has passed, we should look into potentially replacing that bridge. What would that look like? How would that happen? What is the assessment of that bridge structurally? So, we're going to be looking into that as an option. But as I mentioned, this isn't an exhaustive list. I just wanted to give a few examples. We do think that this list of things will grow. And as Ray mentioned, as we work through the design process with partners in our advisory group, it's going to be an iterative process because initial layouts or designs of some of these options, we may find a different way to go working with all those groups. With some of those options, maybe tweak the design and we can provide more benefit or minimize some impacts. And so this is definitely going to be an iterative process that we showed on the timeline. Will take a few months to work through with partners in the community, and we really want to get an exhaustive list developed as well. So with that, I think my next slide turns it back to Greg to kind of wrap this section up.
It does. Thank you, Frank and Ray, for walking through that tremendously important part of the process that we are going to be progressing forward this summer into the fall. So once again, one of the key linchpin to this is that we will be having ongoing stakeholder and community engagement events. Just 2 nights ago, we had a listening session for Hayden Island concerns. There will be a number of other listening sessions as we go on that delve into some of these changes that we are looking at. And so this will be a key part of how we move this forward. We're also talking about continuing work with our regional partners to identify other design options that they think are relevant to this program and that are different than what the last planning effort had on the table. We're going to be collecting data throughout this whole time period, and the data that is going to inform our modeling and analysis is going to be critical. So we're going to be working with both Metro and RTC to look at modeling efforts. We're going to be working with both TriMet and CTRAN to make sure that we are creating all of the information that's necessary to make good decisions. So we talked about developing the screening criteria and performance measures. The other issues is formalizing program commitments. So we've heard from a number of folks who say, and I think Commissioner Hardesty said it earlier, if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist. So we're looking into ways that all of the commitments we're talking about for equity and climate, of how we can capture those, put those into written agreements with the different agencies to move this forward. So this is going to be our challenge over the next couple of months, that you will see us coming back to you and presenting on a number of these issues. So with that, Deb, let me flip it back to you so we can move to the next section.
Great. Well, great. And thank you to all of you for the presentations and the patience and listening, executive steering group members. We are now to the section on your input and feedback, and these meetings always go so fast. So I do want to say to our audience, we will give you the public input time, and I'm going to cut back, Greg, and our wrap up at the end so we can give as much time right now to discussion, but we'll save those 10 minutes at the end and then just do a really quick summary. So there's a couple slides here, Greg, for framing out the discussion piece.
So the last time we met, we heard clearly from ESG that there is a desire to utilize past work, but not be locked into the ability to change where necessary. So we have heard that. We take that charge to heart. We acknowledge that the pathway that we land on will be determined by our federal partners, but it is also a function of if the changes we're making are vastly different than what was on the table before, that's going to be the things that may change us and put us on pathway forward. So we're looking at addressing these changes in a data-driven way. All of you have heard the political statements about transit modes and things of that nature. We are bound to a process, the NEPA process, and it's not a political process. It is a process that looks at data, and decisions are driven by data. Finally, the necessity of the program to demonstrate that commitment and accountability through words and actions. So we know that climate and equity are at the forefront of people's concerns. So we will make sure that these things are addressed in a way that you will see actionable and measurable outcomes. So if it's a construction specification, a design specification that speaks to issues that cover climate, or if it's, once again, an agreement between the DOTs and the partners to talk about the commitments to these efforts. Those are the things we will be looking into and addressing in the upcoming months. So next slide, please. So the question that we want to put in front of you this afternoon is, what input and feedback do you have on our approach? You've heard some of the details of what we're going to be digging into. So we want to know from you what's missing and what concerns you may have. And are there other messages that you want the program to take and share with the Bi-State Legislative Committee in our upcoming meeting? So with that, Deb, I'll flip it over and back to you, and we can start talking about what are the feedback and concerns that folks may have.
Great, great. Thank you, Administrator Johnson. We're eager to hear your thoughts, your reflections, your feedback, and your input. And so I'd like to ask Metro Council President Lynn Peterson, can you go first this time? Always got to pick somebody.
Thank you. Just a couple things. Thank you for leading with a data-driven approach. Greg, I really appreciate that. We've had lots of conversation about that. And I think, you know, both the engineer inside me wants to solve the problem with lines on maps and start like solving. And what we want to make sure this time is that we actually are all focused on the outcomes that we want first, and then try to figure out publicly how to start drawing lines on maps before we want to do it in the right order, right? And make sure. And so I just want to say thank you for your commitment to that, and really to I think just the advocacy on behalf of this committee that the team has been working on to make sure that the things that we value have been reflected back to our federal partners, and trying to find a way through to reflect those values as we go through the process, not just in process, but in the outcomes again, right? So thank you for that. I think we're comfortable with the pathway that you have laid out, where we can get the project screening criteria to demonstrate whether we're actually meeting through that data-driven process, both our climate change and our racial equity lenses that we've put on this project. So our preference, and I think you've laid this out, as pathways 2 or 3. So I'll just end there, but the planner in me gets very nervous if we start getting maps that look like they're final. And so I think the more we can have those discussions about outcomes first is going to be important. Thanks.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hardesty, go ahead.
Thank you. I love following Chair Peterson because it gives me a lot less to say. I'll just say ditto to the things that she said. First, I want to really thank Greg and his team. I know that I pushed too hard and others did as well because, in fact, you know, a lot has changed since the first time we started talking about this project. But we are where we are. And I am confident that with intentionality, we will be, I agree, in like 2 or 3 area, because I do think whatever we do, we'll have to look at what the environmental impact will be. And I love the idea of actually starting with the end goal. If we are not weaving equity and climate mitigation into every story we tell about this project, then I think we will be failing our communities by not ensuring that what we are doing is we're building for the future, and we're not building for the past. And we're going to be innovative, and we're going to be intentional. I still wish we would settle on one term around like whether it's tolling or congestion pricing, because that still makes me a bit batty that we act like those terms are interchangeable, and we all know they're not. But I think we've come a long way in the last couple of months of really being able to solidify a vision about what we want. So I look forward to some really hard conversations about the choices that we need to make to ensure that we are, as a region, moving forward. So thank you for your hard work. Thank you for the advocacy, and we'll continue to do that advocacy in every part of this project.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I am heading around my screen this time, so I see Mayor McInerney-Ogle next.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you and the team for all of the great work. This really is a monumental task. But we're committed to a really strong, transparent reevaluation of all those items that have changed in our region since that last project, and especially looking for that relevant data that we need for the high capacity transit, not just the mode, but the alignment and the station location. As you know, those are some major changes here on the north bank of the mighty Columbia. We did review all of the documents from the feds. That was lovely to see. But we know that we can almost ignore items number 4 and 1. Utilizing all of that past work is important for us. We know that, but things have changed, and we do want to integrate our values of climate and equity into these design decisions for this new project. And as we've all talked about this morning, we know that there are changes that need to be woven or integrated into that process. But I'm going to throw one more piece in here, and that is our concern about the communications piece, especially DeFazio's comments in Willamette Week. It might have shown that he didn't understand the status of this bridge project. And we know how important it is for both our Washington and our Oregon congressional delegations to be informed of everything so that they can be our champions, so that they can be back there in the other Washington, D.C. fighting for this, knowing exactly what's going on and not be surprised. So it'll be helpful if we know what process your team and the 2 dots are using to keep everyone up to date. And while Commissioner Hardesty pushes, I might push a little bit for regular intervals. If we can't do it weekly, can we do it every 2 weeks so that we can reflect all that great progress that we're making and no one is surprised? Then take that document and share it, because every one of the groups that are on this meeting have government affairs teams. We want one voice. So share whatever is going to Washington, D.C. with all of our folks so we know what to take to Salem and to Olympia, so that everyone is speaking the same language and there are no surprises. We're very comfortable with the path that we're seeing right now. Congratulations. We just need to kind of strengthen and refine a few little pieces.
So thank you, Mayor Ann. And I've had conversations with several of the ESG principals over the last couple of days. And that's been one of the conversations of how we can aggressively take back the narrative from others that's being told about this program. So that's one of the things that we're going to be working with the governmental affairs teams from both DOTs to aggressively get in front of the congressional delegations to do some more media outreach to outlets such as Willamette Week, so we can tell our story and not have our story told by others. So we're working on those strategies as we speak.
Great, thank you, Greg.
Right. Thank you, and thank you. I'd like to go to Sean Donahue next. CTRAN?
Yeah, I would just agree with all of the comments that Mayor McInerney-Ogle made, and also appreciative of the comments from Commissioner Hardesty. I think given the information that we have from the federal government, and again, I would echo that I certainly appreciate all the hard work being done by the IBRP team. It has not gone unnoticed. I know it's a very difficult, gigantic project and undertaking to be able to manage all of that. But I think that given this information that we have now, it really provides us an opportunity to maybe slow down for a second, course correct, make sure that we have exactly the plan that we want to put in place in order to move this project forward in the way that we would like to see that project move forward. I think very much like the mayor said, and I would echo the comments that I very much appreciate that, especially from Administrator Johnson, that we don't want this to be necessarily a political spectrum, but it's clear that there's a political influence based on comments being made, and we need to make sure that we attempt to educate as many people as possible on the process that we would like to see collectively as the ESG and from the IBRP team out of the project, so that there's a full understanding of really what we're trying to accomplish, both in terms of adding equity and climate or some of these other items that are of key issue to us, and especially on the issue of transportation. So big thanks to the group. Appreciate everything that they're doing. I know it's not easy, and I know there's a lot of discussion going on, and very much appreciate the comments made by our mayor and those before her. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Next, I'll go to Kristen Leonard, Port of Portland.
Thank you, and we're going to hear a lot of this, but I want to just share my appreciation and agreement for the previous comments. A couple additions. One is we've seen and experienced here again one more time the great work of the Equity Advisory Group. And I think one of the elements of this that I hope we see a lot more of moving forward is how we are taking that same level of expertise and community engagement around climate impact, resiliency, discussions around climate. So just how do we model such a fantastic example of all of this expertise really leading us down a path that we feel very good about on equity, and how do we do the same around climate conversations. Again, I want to share my appreciation for all of the work and kind of where we see ourselves on path you know, whether it be path 2 or 3, somewhere in that space, but the communication, but more than just communication, the partnership with all of our federal partners. And we also stand at the ready, Greg, to your comments about how do we make sure that we are all advocating together with one voice. I hope you see all of us around this table, virtual table, as your ambassadors as well, because we would like to be partners and help in that work. So thank you.
So a couple of things, Kristen, that to your comments. It is our plan to have our principal climate officer, Sarah Ogier, come before and dig into the depth that our principal equity officer did in this go round to share some of the climate framework issues that are being worked on and getting down as granular as construction specifications and things of that nature that will address climate issues, both large and big picture. The other thing is alignment. I think this group, by giving us some direction last month on the pathways you do not want to see us travel on, is demonstrating the alignment that's necessary to show to the congressional delegations that the region is on one page. Now, there are decisions to be made that are going to be tough, but the alignment in how we are going to run the process, I think is key critical. So I do appreciate the efforts by all of the folks on ESG to get to those type of alignment issues for our team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you. Commissioner Hardesty, and then I've got 6 more to go. Yes.
Thank you. It just occurred to me based on the conversation that I can think of a couple of next steps. And I think one is we need a work group among our members so that we can talk among ourselves. Love PowerPoint presentations, love presentations, but as a group to actually build this bi-state vision about how we're going to tackle this project. You know, we know what our parameters are. I think that is key. And I think after that, we need to set meetings with our congressional delegation because it was a little embarrassing to hear our longest serving representative talk in a way that was clear that he was not engaged in what was happening at the moment. And so it's important that we give them the information that they need. So that's 2. And then the third is there needs to be really, really, really good communication with community because it is important that community owns this opportunity. And government speak does not speak well when you're trying to engage grassroots communities. So I hope we're being thoughtful about the style of communication, the information, the opportunities that we create when we say public engagement. You can go to some public meetings and it's all French because you don't have a clue what they're talking about because of the acronyms and the insider conversation that we use. So I just want to caution us to be mindful that everybody doesn't know transportation terminology. So again, thanks for all the work, but as I've listened to people talk, for me, those were 3 next steps I think are going to be critical to us having this common vision moving forward.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And next I'll go to Steve Witter.
Deb, who do you got signed up for public comment?
Hi, Deb. Right now, we only have 1 person signed up for public comment.
So we have 1 at this point.
All right.
So it would help us, great, now 2. So it would help us to know, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Time to public comment.
Okay, we have enough, but I can toggle back and forth, but it would be helpful if you're interested in providing public comment to go ahead and make sure you're on the Zoom webinar and raise your hand, because then Steve, I can manage. It's 2 minutes each, so I'm counting down for the minutes. If you have a few things you want to say, it's okay.
No, okay, I'll make it to the point and just try to add some value here. I come from a construction and then implementation sort of background. So from that lens, the alignment at this table is so important before we even start, you know, blueprints and plans. The other side of that coin, sometimes we need to draw some of these things in order to obtain the data and the feedback. And so I just want to ask my colleagues, and I think we all know this, you know, we're going to test some things out there. They're probably going to be scary, but a transparent, robust conversation about those things is something I look forward to. And I appreciate the commissioner's notion about a smaller work group. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. So Port of Vancouver and then RTC.
Thanks, Deb. I don't have much more to add. I mean, that's the benefit of hearing everyone around the table. I really support the direction that the team is going. I really appreciate the perspectives and agree with the perspectives around the virtual table. I agree communication is very critical. You know, we are all advocates and representatives of this project, and I think we continue to be approached more and more as this project goes on. So the more that we understand where we're at and, you know, able to unify around common discussion points or where we're at in the process, I think would be very helpful. Again, common speak, I think, as I think Commissioner Hardesty mentioned, would be helpful. So I really don't have anything else to add, but again, I think the team's doing a great job of really pulling the information together and just keep feeding the information to us.
Great. Thank you so much. And Chair Hughes?
Thank you. Yeah, I can't believe the job that Greg is doing. This is a Herculean job. I'm certainly not one who would want to do it. And I just agree with what everyone's saying. I kind of like the consensus I'm beginning to hear here. I think we all are feeling that. I would just like to say that I really like the ongoing what's changed analysis. I think that makes it easy. Now, I just praise Greg on mentioned his Herculean job here, but as simple as we can keep it, and, you know, focusing on these physical changes, I think is really important. What we've all heard from, I know from Lynn and Ed and all them, is that the public desires, based on all the feedback we've heard, is kind of what we've had before. And we have to know what those objectives are. What do we want? And what does the citizens want? And I think those are pretty close to what we've had before. So I just wanted to bring that up. And thanks everyone for all their hard work.
Thank you, thank you. So I'm going next to my co-chairs and then we'll wrap up with ODOT and WSDOT. And so how about Co-Chair Washington first?
Yeah, thank you very much, Deb. I just would like to say that, Greg, I appreciate everything that you're doing, and it's a tough job, and appreciate everything that everybody is doing. This has really been one of the most meaningful meetings for me since I've been listening to this. I just feel that I have a sense of things are beginning to coalesce, and I just want to assure you that as we move forward with the citizens and the community groups, we'll be there for you. If I could just take one quick moment and I'll try to make it short as possible. And Commissioner Hardesty, thank you so very much. But you know, as I listened to everything this morning, I was reminded of where I was born. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and I left there when I was about 7 years of age and didn't go back until about 40 years later. And I remember when I went back to my old neighborhood, there had been quite a few changes, and it dawned on me that one of the major changes was that there had been a freeway built about 3 blocks from where I lived. And the school that I attended, which was an all-Black school, was integrated. But I noticed that it had changed also, and perhaps because it was integrated and it was no longer an all-Black school, attention was being paid to it. And then I decided to go back and look at where my relatives had lived. And I went on Google Maps, and I cannot find a single house, including the one where I was born and where I grew up, that was still there. Everything in that entire neighborhood had been wiped out, either gentrified or replaced with freeways. And so I'm just so encouraged by the approach that we all are taking, and that is to ensure that we don't wipe people or their communities out at will. And so I just thank you all so very much for what you're doing and the attention that you're paying to all of the detail. And I'll be there with you unless I have no reason not to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So Ed, I'd just like to say thank you for those comments. And as the conversations I've had both with Director Strickler and Secretary Millar, we are creatures of the DOT world, and we know the history of what DOTs have done across the nation. That's not a proud history. So the commitment here is not to duplicate it, but to try and bring some restoration to this area. So thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. And if we could next then to Co-Chair Valentin.
So lucky me, I get to work with Co-Chair Washington. Now y'all can see why. I hesitate to say anything, but I will just offer that the CAG is working on finalizing a community values and priorities document to present to this group. And I would echo Commissioner Hardesty's comments about qualitative discussion and not just information. And that balance is always so challenging. And so at the next CAG, we're anticipating giving some space, some voice, so that people have an opportunity to share broadly. Even though our small groups have been effective in reporting out, we're also taking a moment to allow people to kind of share where they're at in the process, similar to what we've all just done. So that concludes what I would offer.
Thank you. So next to Secretary Millar and then Director Strickler.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments about the team and the leadership. They're doing a great job, and I'm proud to be a small part of it. There were some great comments too about our communication with our congressional delegations. And one thing that I've learned is that I can talk to a senator, I can talk to a congressperson, I can talk to a state senator or a state representative, and they get one touch, and they get snapshots all the time. It's just one touch. But if we have a common message that we're all comfortable with and we're all reaching out, we're going to be more effective. Our team is working our congressional delegation really hard, but we have 2 senators and 10 congresspeople and earmarks. And every city, county, transit agency, port, you name it, has a request of each of our congresspeople and each of our senators. And then you get somebody like Chair DeFazio. He's got every city, county, transit agency, port, what have you, in the country beating his door down. So we've been doing a good job. We can do a better job. I think we do a better job if we're doing it together. And our delegations are hearing the same message over and over again from the cities, from the MPOs, from the ports, from the transit agencies, from the states. And I think the team can work to get that message together, to bring it to us so that we can agree on it. And then it'll be incumbent on us as representatives of the agencies involved here to get that message out again and again and again. So thank you for the conversation on that. I'm looking forward to making that happen.
Thank you. Director Strickler.
Wonderful, thank you. I will just echo the comments that have been made, whether they be comments about building our capacity and building the available workforce, to the comments made earlier in the discussion by Commissioner Hardesty and others for that matter. Growing the available opportunity that we have within a program like this. And we are looking for change. change within the agency, change within the transportation sector, and change in the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. And I heard outcomes several times today, which is also a point of appreciation for me. As a group like this comes together, the weight and the power and the intellect that is around the table is unmatched in many areas across either our region or other regions for that matter. And so as we're all talking about outcomes, that's a really important commitment piece to forward movement as well. And so I just want to thank everybody for your time, energy, and efforts. This is an important program. We've got a team that's constantly working that tension point between, just to use the construction engineering terms, of the tension point between those outcomes in relation to schedule and those outcomes in relation to getting the right thing done, right? And so we've got to find that balance and help them get there. Because both are necessary. We can't make change without a program or a project going forward, which means we have an obligation to get it right for our communities. And I really appreciate the commitments to outcomes, because I think that's what it's about. So that's my comments, Deb, and thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Executive Steering Group members. We are now going to turn to the public comment period. Josh, if you want to go ahead and put the instructions up on the screen. We do have time to complete this within our time frame. And so really briefly, if you want to make a verbal comment, if you've joined by Zoom, click raise hand. If you've joined by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. I will call on participants. You'll receive an unmute request. Please accept it. If you're commenting by phone, dial *6 to unmute. Please provide your name and affiliation as you start to speak. Attendees will be allocated up to 2 minutes for public comment, and that's the total per speaker. It's the same system we've been following in each of our advisory groups. If we run out of time and you have not had a chance to speak, always remember you can still provide public comment after the meeting. Next slide. So to submit comments after the meeting, fill out a comment form on the program website or email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with ESG Public Comment in the subject line. Call 888-503-6735 and state ESG Public Comment in your message. All written comments must be received prior to 48 hours in advance of each upcoming meeting in order to be distributed to ESG members. We always send those out to our ESG members in advance of the meeting. Comments received after that point are distributed to members in advance of the next meeting. And all comments are always posted to the IBR website. So I think we're set to go now. We have 4 hands up, and first is Robert Liberty. Okay. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Robert Liberty, a former Metro Councilor and resident of Portland, Oregon. The project staff has emphasized the need to stay on an accelerated schedule labeled Path 2 or 3, rather than risk taking another 1 or 2 years to consider a wider range of alternatives, Path 4. I'm testifying today about Path 5. Path 5 is Project Collapse, a repetition of what happened with the prior stage of this project, the Columbia River Crossing. The very same fundamental differences in opinion over tolling, demand management, light rail that contributed to the collapse of the CRC persist today, or perhaps even sharper now. In that connection, I hope you read the recent detailed critique of the CRC and warning about this project by David Bragdon, the president of the Metro Council at the time the CRC was approved. There are many cheaper, greener, more equitable, and more cost-effective projects that would have broader support. Any of them would take you off Path 5, Project Collapse. To avoid Path 5, the ESG needs to assert control of the conversation by directing project staff to devote 2 meetings to discussing the actual project content and outcomes, not the process. First meeting would be devoted to review of the locally preferred alternative of the CRC, and the second meeting would be devoted to other alternatives that are cheaper, more equitable, greener, less contentious, and less likely to be the subject of lengthy litigation. Finally, a word about equity. Would the destruction of Portland's historic Black commercial district by I-5 in the 1960s been equitable if some of the construction jobs had gone to Black workers? To address equity, you need to examine the way the benefits and harms of the whole project are allocated between different social groups over the entire project impact area from Ridgefield to downtown Portland. I've offered comments on that subject previously. Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liberty. Appreciate it. And next up is Dave Rowe. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself. Can you hear us, Dave? Looks like he's still on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got it. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm a commuter, a private citizen. This bridge design project is supposed to look at all reasonable options. And I was surprised at the last meeting, Ray Mabry said the common sense alternative was off the table. And that surprised me, because that should be analyzed, because it's a way to get away from this high mega bridge that the CRC designed back 2012. So that's one thing that we need to look at other alternatives. Another alternative I'd like you to look at is battery-powered intercity passenger rail service. That would be avoiding the I-5 and Rose Quarter by getting people on the present corridor that is operated now with the Cascades. And it's 15 minutes from Vancouver to Portland on the Cascades. So they need to look at intercity passenger rail. And railroads built this country. They never divided neighborhoods like highways have. I agree with Greg Johnson when it decimated, highways have decimated neighborhoods, but railroads have never done that. And I think we should look at railroads as an alternative to this bridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe, appreciate it. And next up is John Lave. If you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, John Lee, private citizen, Southwest Washington. I appreciate Greg Johnson saying these decisions will be driven by data. Overwhelmingly, I have heard on the EAG, the CAG, and in the community listening sessions, people want that data. Where will the population growth be over the next 20, 40, 60 years? Where will our minority populations and their jobs be in the next 20, 40, 60 years? How many vehicles will be on the road in the next 20, 40, 60 years? That's the data that people want to see so that they can make informed input into this group in the process. Overwhelmingly, time is people's most valuable commodity, regardless of their status, their wealth, their jobs, and they want to save time not being wasted stuck in traffic. What has changed over the last decade since the last project went? Fewer people are using transit, more people are using cars. Therefore, what is the data going to drive in this decision making? Is there a need for high capacity transit at all at the present time or in the next 20, 30 years? When might there be a need for high capacity transit? Finally, a question because it's part of your purpose and need. You talk about active transportation. An honest question, who wants to walk or bike on an interstate bridge? I have ridden and I have walked the Glenn Jackson I-205 bridge, and I can tell you it is not pleasant. I would much rather have a separate path for walking and biking. Thank you very much. I look forward to receiving the data.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Lee. And we're on to Bob. If you want to go ahead and start and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Bob Wordblad. I'm with the Washington Business Alliance. I've got a master's in civil engineering, MBA, and for 40 years I was both a professional engineer and certified public accountant. Currently teach the history of infrastructure at the University of Washington. I submitted some public comment about 5 days ago. It was a copy of an email I sent to the city of Vancouver. I hope everybody's had a chance to see it. Maybe I can get a show of hands to have anybody looked at it? 1, 2, 2 hands. Well, that's disappointing. But whatever. I spent many hours preparing this comment. I hope you will review it. It's basically highlights the damage a bridge would do to the city of Vancouver. We were talking about the damage highways have done in the past. I compared the Cross Bronx Expressway to what prepared by Robert Moses back in the 60s, what the damage it did to the Bronx compared to what it might do to the city of Vancouver. You could be interested in seeing that. And I also proposed an option, a much more environmental favorable option. Again, I'm an advocate for an immersed tube tunnel, very simple technology, dropping concrete boxes in the bottom of the river. The most sustainable city in the world, Gothenburg, Sweden, has just finished one. I suspect you suggest you look at that one. It's the second one they built. They built one back in 1960s also. So thank you. Please look at my work. I'm disappointed it wasn't looked at before. It was submitted 5 days ago. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And it was distributed to all of our members, and I'm sure they'll make time, so appreciate your comments. Thank you to all of our public that are here listening and provided comment today. We are on to the wrap up, and we just have to say thank you so much. I know you're staying a minute over. We have a quick slide for the next steps. So just to remind you, your next meeting is on June 17th, 10 to 12. That's going to be a regular meeting time. We have topics on the agenda, including Community Advisory Group and Equity Advisory Group updates, high-level review of the technical work on data analysis and design options, as well as an update on the climate framework. We do know that there will be a bi-state legislative committee meeting soon. The program's working with the co-chairs and staff to get a meeting scheduled as soon as possible, so we'll be providing more news on that as it happens. There's a whole number of community listening sessions. We encourage everybody to go on the website and see them. Freight Movement, May 27th, Downtown Vancouver, June 1st, Active Transportation, June 8th, Sustainability and Climate, June 17th. And we've already conducted 2, so please everybody strive to attend and look for that info on the website. And then just a couple bits on the action items. I want to thank Commissioner Hardesty for her ideas. We'll be sure to take those in and get moving and be able to get back to you as soon as possible. To everybody on this group, you've all given great suggestions, input, and feedback, and all that will be gathered and transmitted to the Bi-State Legislative Committee. We always post the documents to the website, so folks, please go see them. We'll have a meeting summary, and they have been really useful. You're all giving so much important information, so we collect that and summarize it there, as well as the public comment that we receive and continue to appreciate receiving. I want to hand it back to Greg for a quick wrap up, and then we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
And this will be a quick wrap up. I just want to thank everybody for their time. We're at an inflection point in the program. We have guidance to move forward. We have a plan to move forward. So we're going to be enacting that plan and giving you more details as we move forward on the data that's being collected and the analysis that's being done. So once again, just thank you for your time and alignment on these important issues.
Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe, stay healthy. Meeting adjourned. Take care.